The other thing about talking to people is really discovering what local means, because again, rather like me confessing to my prejudices about certain parts of Islington, I think we all have to face up to our preconceptions of what the right solution is in the right place. And out in Dagenham, we did a project for a primary school extension at a school called William Bellamy Primary School. And here we asked, how could we make a building that kind of respected the industrial tradition of the area? So this is very much a conversation about aesthetics and the kind of cultural meaning of the building. And this is what the building looks like from the outside. It really tries to be a building that's much bigger than it really is, because I don't know if you're familiar with the area around the Civic Centre out in Dagenham. It's incredibly flat. There are only a few tower blocks, and there are very few sort of buildings with civic presence, so we were trying to achieve that. But we were also mindful that we had occupants of the building who were all under 5, and this was the sort of first time we really asked children what they thought at that age. And so we asked them to draw, we kind of did a workshop with a group of the nursery children about what were their favourite things in a garden, because we knew we'd be providing a garden. And then we said, what do you like seeing on the way to school? And we really thought that the kind of built environment would figure more highly, and that cars and kind of the pressure, because you go out there and it feels quite a car-led sort of location. And what we came back with were, yes, there was a zebra crossing that was quite enjoyable. There were flowers and there were people, but most importantly, there were squirrels. Now, our preconception of Dagenham was not one of finding this incredible nature being very present, but clearly the children did see nature. Where we adults are up here, we don't see that nature, and they do. And so we made a motif running through the building as experience from a child, that these animals, the flora and fauna of Dagenham, would actually appear throughout this sort of quite large building. So instead of having manifestation and having, sort of the normal rhetoric of buildings, we have a language of these animals creating the manifestation on the windows, for example. So the chap from building control in Dagenham did have a problem with this, because I slightly parody what he said, but he said, I don't have a box for a red fox. He was asking, why don't we have just those standard dots or those standard lines on the windows? And we had to actually produce a report for him to prove that a red fox or a squirrel could have the same visual effect on a piece of glass as a bit of manifestation. That's what we had to do to get that one through. But what's important here is that there's very low threshold, and whilst being entirely secure, you come in and you don't have that sense of being in lobbies, being forced through these diagrams of security. And then you come through the classrooms out into the outside space, and you're absolutely enveloped with a camouflage of all the animals that we talked about. And it almost has the effect of a kind of wallpaper that's like a bedroom. It feels extraordinary when you're under these canopies where the children spend most of their time. And so that they can see the animals that they were interested in reflected in their architecture at their scale, at a micro scale. So finally, pulling back, this is the view of the building as you walk round, and it tries with its towers to sort of have a conversation with its local context and actually acknowledge that this is a context of meaning, and not to just ignore it. So we've talked a lot about triple deckers, and talked on your matrices, it mentioned identity and kind of welcome. Well, one of our first projects that we had to work on was in Brixton, and we were asked to work on this school called Stockwell Primary. It's not actually in Stockwell, it's in Brixton. So it had a bit of an identity crisis. I stood out here before we did the work. This was originally a brick wall. I stood outside the brick wall asking a local policeman, did he know where Stockwell Primary was on Stockwell Road? And he directed me down to Stockwell Tube Station, which is about half a mile away from here, and told me it was down there. Such was the presence or lack of presence of this school. It was absolutely stunning. So one of the simple things we did was wanted to create visual permeability into the school, and we think that's absolutely important. So many schools suffer from a lack of identity. Now, John and I were talking, we're all involved in feasibility studies for big secondary schools, enormous scales, and you look at plans and they literally have like a little driveway for 1,000 people to go back into this school. No wonder people don't have a sense of identity, because you literally can't see it. But we were asked to reorganise this school. It was still in the model you were talking of in part. It was the ground floor was the infant school with one head teacher, one staff room, a whole separate identity, whilst upstairs were 2 floors of the junior school with its own head teacher and its own sort of segregation between the two. And there were about 5 different entry points into this site. So the idea was to rationalise it, to have one entry point, and to have one school as a whole as a part of the amalgamation works. And the sequence is you come from the street, and the local authority responded to this school and put in a zebra crossing immediately after we'd made this new entrance, which we thought again was a sign of success. We made a very, very simple, secure lobbied system of entering the school, but dressed it in a rhetoric that is not one of security, absolutely, and crucially created a very supervised entrance. And for fear of being overly anecdotal, just to remind you of how bad things used to be in education, this is from about 1999 when this school was done. This was designed. The head teacher's office was located here, and we said we'll make a reception. Obviously, we have lots of views out of the reception to let the staff see the parents and the children as they come in, and that was our idea. And the head teacher said to us afterwards, well, one of the reasons that I would like you to have that degree of proximity between my office and the entrance is to supervise the staff, because this was a really failing school where staff were literally coming into work at about 9:30, 10:30, much later, and leaving these teaching assistants to run the classes. And it was really interesting, the idea of management and staff supervision, that we never even knew those workplace issues existed until we worked with this school. So it's been an education for us. This school is now way at the top of the register as one of those fantastic outperforming schools, and it's done really well through the introduction of the new teacher. And I've just got 2 more to show. One of the conundrums you probably all dealt with is about traffic and highways impacts on schools, and how you have the phenomenon of the drop-off, and this kind of, particularly with private schools, where you have the kind of Chelsea tractor phenomenon and this kind of big traffic impact, local residents up in arms. And we had the benefit of working on a prep school, which was something we weren't familiar with personally. But what was interesting is we were asked to put a large prep school of 400 children in the centre of Putney, and we knew that coming with them would be a huge amount of traffic. And this was for a private school that was owned by developers who'd bought the site, hoping to develop it for housing, had an existing small school on its site, had a look at the cash flow to do with the school, and decided it was actually an incredibly profitable business. So they wanted to marry private education and house building at the same time. And the reason I showed just this, I'll show you this one slide of it, is because if you talk to the Tories about what they're hoping to do in their future potential administration, they are talking about letting new schools happen very, very quickly, and they'll probably be making adjustments to the planning system if they want that to happen. And they came to us and asked us to explain this school and how it worked, how these developers had managed to achieve a school for 400 kids, plus behind here, this is, I don't know if anybody knows Putney Bridge Road in Putney, behind here is quite a large housing development. And how we did it was, with our client, the decision was made to place the whole of the school on an underground car park, which normally in education is way beyond the budgets of education. But here it worked because it was about the private-public, that it was about the private-private partnership of a school and a housing development. And as you can see by the red lights going into the garage entrance, they have a green travel plan which included the timetable delivery and drop-off of children into this building, and the cars sweep immediately off the road and then they stack underground, and they have a managed system of taking the children up to the classes with it. And then the huge car park, which is surplus to requirement for the number of staff, actually provides secure parking for the residential development behind as well. So you have a kind of mixed use of the site at the same time. So the final project I'm going to show you is about the sort of synthesis of the sort of urban design scale of a really large new project and the sort of manifestation of the architecture at the end of it. So we won a competition about 4.5 years ago to design a special needs school and a secondary school together on one site in Guildford. And we went to the existing school, Pond Meadow School, which is a special needs school where you have a huge amount of interface between real micro-scale issues of helping people to have a wonderful learning environment whilst they have these special needs. So this is a classroom at Pond Meadow as it existed, where you get information learning and technology for lifting and carrying and moving all in one environment. And then the other school was Christ College School, which is the secondary school, and this is probably familiar to lots of you who talked about your 60s secondary schools. It was one of these pavilion designed schools, and that literally had so many points of entry we kind of gave up counting because this was the front door and none of the students used it. They weren't asked to use it, but this was just for visitors, and as you could see nobody could enter it anyway with ease. And it was set in a very suburban context. These are the local brick buildings nearby. And this was the approach. The site was of the existing Christ College School on your left, and then huge amounts of open fields and play space. And we were asked to put the two schools on this site, leaving Christ College running, which is something you'll be familiar with, this phased development of sites. So you have to let the secondary school run whilst you build a new secondary school. And we found this absolutely beautiful setting, kind of meadows. What could be better? Pond Meadow School in a location that literally had meadows. But we had a lot of accommodation to put on this site, and this plan shows you the overall location of the. Our site was here, and this was the existing school. What we noticed when we went here was, again, going out to 35,000 feet and asking what the infrastructure was here, is we had the main rail line running to one side of the site, coupled with a whole series of pylons. We had the cemetery, and further over, this is this is housing estates from the interwar years, a bit of park up here, and then you have industry, etc. over here. And what we discovered was there's an absolute wealth of green space in this area in North Guildford, but it's all entirely cut off from the people immediately around our around our school. That's where the red question mark is. You have this whole area of Guildford is segregated from the wealthy, your preconceptions of Guildford, you know, it's the sort of heart of Surrey. It's cut off by railways, pylons, sewage works, cemeteries and rivers and the A3. So it's really hard for these people to move around. And what we discovered was that originally the site had been the location of a big sort of country house, and it had been sold off in parcels. And in fact that beautiful landscape was the remnants of a 18th and 19th century landscaped park. So it had a really fantastic heritage that we could build on. But what we noticed most particularly, this came from videoing the site, was we kept noticing people walking along this track. And you can just see that there was a hole in the fence on one side and a hole in the fence on the other. And basically, all of the people living in this estate here were completely landlocked. And in order for them to travel to their local primary school, their shops, all of their kind of main sort of everyday facilities, they would, in urban design terms, have been asked to walk on this rather large loop around our site. And what had happened is people had gone to the trouble to make a penetration through the fence to allow them to get to where they needed to go quickly. So you can imagine the joy our client had when, having commissioned a really inexperienced young architectural practice to design two schools for the value of about £33 million, the first thing we said was, actually what we want to do on your site is put a road across it and let the people come through. Well, you've got to remember, this is an education authority which has been inculcated with this culture of security, 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 and you just don't let people onto your site. So we absolutely wouldn't let go of this idea that you had to allow people through the site, because we knew if we didn't let people through, they would jolly well get the wire cutters out again and make their way through the site. And we understood the existing school, which was down here, which had a really, 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 really poor attendance and academic performance level, was partly due to the fact that a lot of the children who went to it in that estate had been treated really badly by that school through all of their kind of infant and junior years. They had to sneak through the grounds in an illegitimate way, and they weren't given any kind of dignity in terms of their everyday life, so the school was hardly going to give, engender a sort of respect. But anyway, we came to a conclusion that we would place the secondary school here and the special needs school here, and that we'd create a sort of civic space, a civic public space at the front of those two schools, so they could share a kind of identity together and provide a heart to this area that had originally been represented by that country house. So there were two buildings that sort of suited the landscape with these grand trees. But we also got the benefit of, through making a roadway, of placing all of the car parking to the rear of the site here, so that you're not dominated by cars when you enter that school. So it's really, cars are the least important thing on the minds of children when they're entering school, and they all enter through the front door off that main public space. So we achieved our ambitions of what we called guerrilla urbanism, and we did achieve planning, and we did get it built, and we made this wonderful road that kind of divides and unites at the same time, and really does create a sense of connection. It's now part of Surrey's green cycle pathways. It's on a sort of green route, and it's really well and truly integrated that area, and it's proved really, really fantastic. Even though it's only just been finished, it's busy all the time with people using it. So just to touch on the buildings themselves, this is the secondary school, a really efficient, dense school, complete antithesis of the 60s model of all over the place pavilions, and that was really led by cost, by educational ethos in the first place, because the head teacher wanted all children and staff to enter the school through one door. He wanted one identity, and we wanted to make it from brick, because we thought Surrey, it's all about brick. And also brick is such an underutilised material, and it really is fantastic. So both of the buildings are made from the same brick. And it's a large carved mass. It minimises the surface area, because you're gathering up, scooping up all of the accommodation and building it dense. It actually means you have a smaller external area to your building, so you lose heat less quickly during the winter. And also it means you have a smaller external area, therefore you have a higher budget per square metre, so you can afford nice brick. So it was a strategic design decision. When you go in through that entranceway, you enter one big central learning, it's called the Learning Centre, at the heart of the school, from which all of the classrooms and different faculties are accessible. This space doubles as a dining hall with P's and a computer area, a learning area. It's always busy during the day. You can have assemblies there, etc. Children can look across. The behaviour has radically changed in the school since they moved in. There is sequence up through the building of different courtyards, so it might look big, bold and solid from the outside, but it really breaks down in scale as you go through it. And it has its network of smaller spaces, like John was talking about, these kind of pod areas and these smaller learning spaces, as well as having these larger spaces. And most importantly for us, in the journey through this school, we precisely located windows so that as you went up and down these schools, during the school spaces during the day, you looked out at the other schools, at the local landmarks, the cathedral in the distance, and it really sort of knitted back into its context. And the craftsmanship's been quite extraordinary that has been achieved by contractors using design build, so it's a testament that there is another way from BSF. You do not have to go down that route. And then very quickly, this is the special needs school. It's absolutely vast. It takes over 5 minutes to walk from one end to the other. It's for only 93 children. Each class has under 7 children in each class, but it's organised with an upper school for the teenagers nearer to the secondary school. The centre of the school is the community area with hydrotherapy pools, halls, and then the lower school at the other end there is for the infants. We've got children in the school here from age 2 to 19, so it's a journey through their life from being very, very young right the way through to adulthood in one building. So we wanted every room to be different and for them to connect to this wonderful nature. You can see the beautiful trees there. This is the infants area with its big canopy, looking across the pond to the meadow area. Generous public areas, very simply animated through the form of the roof. And then we worked finally with an artist to get that micro detail again, and he worked with these privacy screens at low level. We had large windows, but we wanted privacy for the children where they're working, and Martin Richmond, who you might know, worked with us on this project. We've got lots of natural daylight, and as you can see, the technology, this is a hoist system that you're looking at here. It completely blends in with the architecture, and the kind of medicalised environment for learning is completely subsumed into just a wonderful space to be in. Nice place to swim. You can swim and look out of the window at the same time, which is a nice privilege. And at night as well, again, going right way back to Bury, we still have our external play areas, so the children can play in the winter. And then finally, as you approach the building at different times of day, this reflective film that Martin Richmond worked with us on creates this animation at low level, again, a kind of changing delight at a children's scale. But that's the last thing I'd like to say is, for us, the most important journey when we do any urban design, any school design, is a child's journey to school, because if you don't get that right, you can't expect much to go well in the future. Thanks.